Hey out there, legal warriors. False beliefs about why my case is taking so long. What's a false belief? It's something that somebody thinks might be causing something to happen that's really not so. And we get so many questions about how come my uncharged case is taking so long? Is the prosecutor working really hard to get to my case? Is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing? Well, if you're interested in this area of the law, stay tuned. This is the video for you. My name is Attorney Lance Fryrear. I'm a defense attorney in Linwood, Washington. My law firm's been defending people charged with crimes all throughout Washington State for more than 20 years, and I'm putting out these videos to help educate the public. So if you find this useful, please like and please subscribe. More people get to see it. More people get the help they need. Now, as always, I'm just going to jump right into it. There's a couple different categories of situations that how we look at it in my law firm for criminal cases. There's charged cases. That means you've actually got a court date where you have to go to an arraignment or a pretrial, things like that. And uncharged cases where you've been arrested or you're being investigated for a crime and it's been sent to the prosecutor's office. And if you've been arrested, released with no charges yet. And I've got a whole bunch of videos explaining why certain cases are no charges yet. And that would be felony charges. The prosecutor has to countersign. It's not up to the police officer whether or not this case proceeds as a charged case. County level non-felony charges, state patrol cases, sheriff cases. Those cases, almost always, it takes a county prosecutor to file a charge. And so that leaves a whole bunch of people waiting, trying to decide, hey, am I okay or am I going to get charged with the crime? And we represent a lot of people in that situation. And we hear a lot of our own clients, go over some things. What does this mean? What does this mean, Lance and Lance's team? How come it's taking so long? And I'm going to go over some of the reasons we might hear or you might think why it's taking so long and whether that's really true or that's not true. And the first reason we often hear is, hey, is it bad that it's taking so long? Is the prosecutor really looking hard in my case and trying to build a case against me? And almost always the answer is no, it is not bad that it's taking a long period of time. As time passes, if you can stay out of trouble, the case doesn't get worse for you, it only gets better. People forget, witnesses move, it's less urgent because it's older. And no, almost always the prosecutor is not building a case against you. It's not the prosecutor's job to do a law enforcement investigation. That's police officers do that. So if your case is still being investigated, it's almost always because a prosecutor sent it back to law enforcement, get me some more information. My first 7 years was as a prosecutor. I had forms I would fill out. I'm not going to charge this yet. Dear detective, go get me this information. Dear detective, go get me that information, then send it back to me to make a decision. Because it's pretty much impossible to build a case once it's charged. You need to get all your work done as a prosecutor or law enforcement prior to charging to have a solid case when you charge it. So if the case is taking a long time, almost always it is not because the prosecutor is trying to build a better case. It's usually just because the system is really slow. So that's number one. If it's taking so long, is it because they're trying to build a better case? No, not necessarily. What's a second false belief about why my case might be taking so long? Well, my case isn't that serious. That's why it's taking so long, right? It's good news it's taking so long. Well, also not necessarily so. A very serious case can take a long time because it's a big decision whether to charge. A not very serious case could also take a long time because where it is in the stack, the fact that it does have less priority, although it can still be very serious to you. Usually a prosecutor's office is going to have different teams. Certain prosecutors will be in the charging unit, and even in the charging unit, that's often divided into categories of cases: crimes against persons, special assault crimes, property crimes. As you might guess, in most situations, there's going to be more resources put towards very serious special assault crimes, very serious crimes against persons, than it will be for property crimes. But you can't make an assumption if it's taking longer, it's being looked at more or less seriously. The main reason it's taking longer is because there's a whole bunch of cases in front of you, and probably it's not hitting that very, very serious sexual offense case, something like that, where they do want to move more quickly to protect the public. I think the third false belief that we often hear from clients why it's taking so long is, well, if it's taking so long, that means the prosecutor's just going to do nothing, right? It's going to be declined because why wouldn't they have already charged it, right? It's been a year and a half. I'm out of the woods, aren't I, Lance? Man, I wish that were true, but it's not true. Nowadays, many, many times, a prosecutor will end up charging something really near to or actually at the statute of limitations. What is the statute of limitations? It's how long a prosecutor has to file a criminal charge against someone. And there's different rules for different types of charges, but for the most part, simple misdemeanors are 1 year, gross misdemeanors are 2 years, most felonies are 3 years, there are some exceptions, and serious offenses involving sexual offenses, some of those have no statute of limitations. But it's not unusual that we will see a case charged right at the 2-year statute of limitation mark, or right at the 3-year statute of limitation mark. And so that belief the client might have, or you out there in the world might have as well, if it's taken a year and a half, it probably means nothing's going to happen. That's just not true, right? It just means that it could mean nothing's going to happen, but it doesn't mean that that is necessarily so. What we typically have to do, depending on the type of prosecutor's office, we might call a prosecutor's office if we know that's not going to trigger a review by a prosecutor, say, hey, can you tell me in the computer, is there a status on this case or not? It's not something I recommend anyone do on their own because we don't want to ring the bell and say, oh, remember, prosecutor, look at this case before the statute of limitations runs out. We have to have some knowledge about where it's safe to call to try to get an update. Is there a decision or not? Where in other places it might be more dangerous. General rule of thumb, if it's a city prosecutor, it's a little more dangerous to call the city prosecutor's office because they usually have a little bit less robust system for tracking cases, and that might remind them a case exists when maybe you don't want to remind them it exists if you don't want them to get to your case during the statute of limitations where they're still allowed to charge it. If it's beyond the statute of limitations, for the most part, they cannot charge the case unless they argue an exception. I have seen prosecutors argue exceptions if they know that the suspect is out of state and not subject to process of service, and they can prove that, then they can argue to extend the statute of limitations. Now, the reason why we don't want to just go around calling prosecutors and talking to them about what happened. So while I've covered those false beliefs, let's talk about what I think and how I think it really works. Basically, why cases take a long time. Might seem obvious, it's because there's so many cases and so few prosecutors to handle that many cases. Now remember, as I've said before, I was a prosecutor. That was many years ago. I started prosecuting 30 years ago. And back then, I only had a little small stack of cases, right? I didn't have that many. And then I got a little bigger. Each year, more and more cases would build up. And even for me, with not that many cases to review, it might take me 3 months, 4 months, 5 months to get to cases because I'm actually in court prosecuting other cases. So the cases that get more attention are crimes against persons, cases where we've got alleged victims calling up or families of alleged victims wanting something done. For the most part, it just sits in the pile and they get to it when they get to it. And then depending on the quality of the evidence and how busy they are at the time and what the standards are at the time and what someone's criminal history is at the time, a prosecutor just makes a personal judgment decision about whether or not they want to pursue a charge. There may be guidelines and there may not be guidelines. When I was a prosecutor, I didn't have any guidelines. I just made a decision based upon what I thought was right, based upon my own personal morals, life experiences, my own ideas, okay? Bigger jurisdictions, they may have written guidelines, but it's still a human making the decision. So they can make a decision to decline to prosecute, but realize that they make a decision to decline to prosecute, that doesn't keep them from changing their mind within the statute of limitations. They could change their mind and still prosecute. Why might that happen? Well, let's say they decide not to prosecute due to lack of victim contact, lack of victim participation. They enter a decline notice. You go put it all over Facebook. Yay, it's declined. Yay. The victim sees your Facebook. Now they call up the prosecutor. What are you doing? I want to participate. Now they just undo the decision. Now you're charged, right? So that's why you need good attorneys to talk to about how it works in the real world. It doesn't work how you think it works. It works how it works. And it's different for each location. But what I really want you to know, if it's an uncharged case, taking longer is better, even though it puts stress on us and we're nervous about it. But how we can really make it better is go find yourself a decent attorney who you trust, who sounds like they know what they're talking about, and who can take steps to put your mind at ease while also trying to improve your situation, or at the very least not make it worse. So that's what I have to say. If you found it useful, please like and please subscribe. More people get to see it. More importantly, if you have a criminal problem in Washington State, feel free to reach out to my firm. If we get on board, we'll listen to what happened, we'll identify a way forward, and we will be there for you. Thank you.